Hey everyone, good morning. Welcome to our Qualitative Wednesday. And it's really exciting to be here today because it's not every day that I actually get to comment on a blog post that is not mine. So I feel like this one has that special treat that I am talking about someone that I respect and that I am so honored to have a piece of writing by Dr. Kalia O'Wright on the blog. And especially because she chose the first Tuesday of February for a very specific reason with our contribution to the Black History Month. And I think it is very special that I got to have her honor that and write about her perspectives as a professor, as a Black female scholar. So if you haven't read the blog post, you will need to do it. Yeah, I'm just checking here. You will need to do it because I am not going to reiterate everything she writes or she wrote there. I just wanted to actually take this opportunity to talk about a few things that I think it's interesting to me because when Kalia sent me a message with her first draft, she said, "Oh, I took a look at the other blog posts and I tried to kind of like follow the same format and do something that feels like it aligns with the other blog posts on QualiQ on the blog." And I absolutely loved that she infused storytelling and talked about the Wheel of Fortune, the show, as her opening to explain what it means to move past that rut and drew that parallel to show and a show, pop culture, whatever we want to call it. And the reason why I am actually bringing this up is that if you have been following the blog for a while, you know that I tend to say and repeat often how I think recreation or recreation and leisure activities, readings that are not necessarily related to your line of work, are important to your work. And I know writing a blog post is different than writing a paper or a proposal for your work. However, I would say that those insights and creative ways of expressing ideas are helpful for writing qualitative research data. I think that when we are able to infuse elements from culture, from things outside of our area of study in how we present, how we showcase, or how we make our data more fun and engaging, I think we tend to gain with that. We gain with captivating audiences and having more people actually read and take a look at an infographic, whatever we have as an output of our research. So I do want to say that even though Kalia did that exercise of storytelling to write a blog post, I do believe that there is something to be said about feeding what many marketers call feeding our creative juices with things outside of our work. That to me is really important for our capacity to actually stepping outside of the rut of our work or of our data and to really be able to think about it in novel ways or present it in different ways. I have a couple of blog posts about recreation and the things like I wrapped up 2020 with a blog post about rest and things that I was doing. I also have one from last summer, I think, like June or July. So if you want to go back and read those whenever you have time, please do so. But if not, I am encouraging you to not feel guilty about reading fiction or a memoir or a novel when you have amount of papers to read, because I think those papers are very important. I'm not going to put them as less or more important. They are very important. However, readings, thinking, dreaming, drawing parallels with things outside of your work can be really enriching to your work as well. So that's my first point about Kalia and her writing. And I loved it. I will confess that I have never watched The Wheel of Fortune. I know what it is, but I have never actually sat down to watch it. So it was just interesting, and I was curious about it. I did a bit of YouTube search. So with that, as my first point, she did talk about moving past that rut when we almost like get in our heads and we read our data with almost like not sure if we're capturing the deeper meanings, if we're getting it right. I think it's that, like, am I getting this right? And that's where she introduced three strategies that she has used, and I really like them, and I agree with the three of them. And I think the way she even ordered them in my head also makes sense. Thinking about your research questions as your anchor is the first one that she talked about. So when you're looking at your data and keeping your research questions in mind, it's important because you have that anchor to guide your thinking and guide your thoughts. However, and this is something that we even discussed here in the previous weeks when we were talking about when to bring your research questions to the table again. You have to be very careful because staying too attached to the research questions can also mean getting yourself into this rut that doesn't allow you to think outside of the box or of what you were expecting but maybe not necessarily seeing in your data. I have talked about that, I think last week, when I said that I was caught in the act more so along those lines, because when I started my PhD, my research questions were very much aligned with my dietetic background and what I was interested in seeing in terms of eating, nutrition, nutrients, and pregnancy. And when I started my research, my data was not indicating and feeding my understanding of those research questions. So that's when having your research questions is important. Absolutely, yes. Are they anchors? Yes. However, as Kalia said in her blog post, you also need to ask yourself a question that I had to actually be asked to ask myself. Like, okay, my data is really not answering the research question that I initially planned. There is something else here. What is that something else? If it's not answering the question that I initially thought it was going to be answering, what question is being answered? And a lot of people, especially if they are new to qualitative research, if they are more aligned with positivist paradigms, or they have a strong background in quantitative research, quantitative, not qualitative research, they might get really nervous with that idea, because you don't change a hypothesis for a quantitative study after you start it. You don't change your research question. But in qualitative research, you can, and you should, if your data is not answering your research question. That is not being less rigorous. On the contrary, that is being responsive to your data and showing your readers, your peers, your reviewers that you actually paid attention throughout your research process to what your data was saying, and you responded accordingly by adjusting and potentially changing your research question. So in my case, in the example that I gave, it went from a research question that was grounded in nutrition and eating during pregnancy to a question that was more general about what health meant, what it meant for women to be healthy during pregnancy. We didn't go into what it does it mean for you to eat well. We really took this step back and had a question that was way broader than our initial question. So that's the second point that she brings up, and I wanted to comment on that. And the abductive reasoning is the third one that she mentioned there. If you're not familiar with abduction, and Maria Mayen, like my mentor, she jokes in her book that it's not the type of alien abduction. If you're not familiar with what abductive reasoning means, Kalia offered a reference that was actually new to me. And I now have Sarah Trace's book in my wish list because I love her paper. And if you don't know this paper, you want to know this paper because I think it's one of the best papers that actually describes rigor in qualitative research. And it's a 2010 paper, the 8 Big Tent. 8 as number 8, Big Tent. And it's the first time that I actually heard the name of this author, and I really like her writing style. And now she has a book, and it's the book that Kalia referenced in her post, and I'm super curious to take a look at the book and see how it's explained. For me, and inside Qualitative Research Blueprint, I do explain abductive reasoning and what abduction means when I talk about qualitative data analysis. And the main reference that I have used in the past, like not only in my work, but to also build the lecture for QRB, was Constructing Grounded Theory by Kathy Shermaz. She talks about abductive reasoning within the context of grounded theory, but she makes it really easy to understand as well, and you can apply abductive reasoning to other methods. What other methods? Like in my case, what I have used abductive reasoning has actually been in the context of qualitative description. So when I did qualitative description in the last 2 studies, we did incorporate previous theories and ideas as we were finalizing that analysis, and we presented our final codes and categories, our codes, subcategories, and categories. Actually, you rarely get to see codes in the writing. So our categories and subcategories, we presented using theories that were already published and that were really useful for us to not only organize our data, but also to bring that element of novelty to the areas that we were publishing and presenting our research. So with those 2 key references in mind, if you are curious and you want to learn more, you have a couple of places to go. And Maria, in her book, The Essentials of Qualitative Inquiry, another one that I use heavily inside QRB, and I use it heavily because I also have worked in the second edition of the book. There is also a very brief but very clear explanation of what abductive reasoning is, or abduction. So if you want to start there, that's another place. I see some of you are watching live. So if you have any questions, please post them. I'll give it a minute. I can ramble for a minute and give you a minute to ask any questions if you have. But that's all I had it for today. Let me double check my notes here. Yes, I did touch on the 3 points that she talked, but I really want to encourage you to actually go and read the blog post. It's a different, what I'm doing here, it's completely different from going there and reading for yourself. I think there will be more things that you will absorb and reflect upon and see if they would work for your project. So please take a moment, go read it, go see how she embedded that in the context of Black History Month, and how interesting it is to think about that in that perspective. Yeah, if it is compatible with another one. So Amy is asking, abductive is compatible with grounded approach, qualitative description. Was there another? You know, not that I can think of from my personal experience. I think if I think about, for example, the studies of like ethnography is not one that I would see as being able to use abductive reasoning. It doesn't seem to align well. However, remember when we talked about the pragmatic approach. So, with that pragmatic approach, and I'm referencing Amy knows what I'm talking about because we've discussed the pragmatic approach. So, when you think about that pragmatic approach, Amy, you can think about research that is conducted, for example, indigenous research, community based participatory research is not rooted in the pragmatic approach. It is a more of a liberation and the transformative paradigm. However, think about it as big umbrellas. And sometimes you use the principles of those approaches and you don't necessarily name any method or methodology for how you're doing things. So you might be conducting interviews or doing focus groups. And when that happens, I think it is also possible to incorporate the abductive reasoning in your data analysis. So do I see abductive reasoning making sense in ethnography, phenomenology, or even like interpretive description? No, not really. But I see it possible and reasonable and justifiable if you're using principles of patient-oriented research or community-based research or even indigenous research approaches. So I think in those cases, it is possible. Even more if you are working within that pragmatic paradigm. I hope that makes sense. Yeah. Yes. So if it is, I apologize for bringing something up that I feel like I'm having a one-on-one conversation with Amy, but we are talking about really the foundations of qualitative research, and it's the thing that we discussed in module 1 of QRB, of Qualitative Research Blueprint, and we discussed like where are you coming from in terms of your paradigm. And when you are coming from that paradigm of the pragmatic lens, you do recognize more what is already published in the literature and what is already out there, and you have almost what I call like a more solution focused and more of that intent to see changes in practice is a big driver of how you do and how you present your research. So within that foundation of that paradigm, you can more, I would say, more strongly justify the abductive reasoning. I hope that makes sense. Yes, it does make sense. Yeah, so that's all. Oh, thanks for the reference of 8 Big Tent. Oh, yes. So, Mary, the book that she had is by Sarah Tracy. It's on the blog. The other one I can actually post a link on the comments later. It's Constructing Grounded Theory by Kathy Sharmas. I can take a look at even the pages when I am done here because I have that reference inside the course. So I'll take a look and I can kind of like point you in the right directions, like the pages where Kathy Sharmas talks about it. Because if you have access to your library, it might be just easy to go and read those particular pages. And I really like how she phrases it, and I find her writing really easy and good, like easy to understand and also good to grasp right off the bat. So you might be able to gain a lot by jumping to those particular pages. So I'll do that once we are done here. Okay? So have a good week, everyone, and I will see you here next week. And I can't remember what will be up on the blog, but it will be, it is going to be an interesting one. Spoiler alert, I'm using an acronym you're probably not familiar with in the title of the blog post, and it's an idea that I was introduced to recently. So it's PBOD. So So P as in Peter, Peabod. So if you're curious about what that means, you have a date with me here next Wednesday. So take care, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.